My name's Norby, and I'm managing editor of FlipGeeks.com. And with me is Mr. Wyatt Kennedy, writer.
Hello.
Yeah, writer of Bolero, right?
Yeah, right.
Hello?
Oh yeah, did it freeze for a second?
It froze a bit. Oh yeah. So good. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Very kind of anxious, considering the release date's coming up. But I'm really excited, and it's weird that this thing is just gonna exist in people's homes now more than anything.
Yeah. Do you know the amount of copies that are printed?
I do know. I don't know. Because I don't really know the printing process, I don't know if there's a definitive, if there's a cutoff of how many they printed. But we sold, I think, about 100 short of 20,000 copies, which for a first time, this is my first comic series ever. I'm completely new to this. I've been told is very good, so that was very fortunate, and I'm very lucky that people seem to be really into the idea, and so far the early reviews have been very kind to both me and Luana.
Right. Well, Image, you guys are published by Image Comics, and Image Comics are well known for being independent from and being supporting creators to own their own properties.
Oh yeah.
How do you market your Bolero to local?
Well, it's funny because I am an unknown quantity, and I've been told many times, especially by a lot of the friends that I have here in Portland, where there's a lot of image writers and illustrators here, since it's based out of Portland, that there's something that's really exciting to new comic stores about just unknown, a brand new creative team, especially with the amount of countless books, because there's tons of writers right now who are putting out 3 books a month, and then you just have this unknown brand new thing that it's fun to kind of take the risk, because for certain stores to support it, it's kind of being oh yeah, I was there before this really blew up.
Right. Well, could you tell me about Bolero? What is Bolero about, Ken?
Bolero is about a girl named Devin Dagny. The short version is that Devin's just going through a really hard time. I joke a lot that she is going through the period in your 20s that I refer to as Spider-Man 2-ing it, in that everything around her is just completely breaking down. Her job, she just got out of a breakup with someone that she's known for over a decade, someone that was so important to her. And everyone else in her friend group is just kind of moving on with their lives, and she feels completely left out, and she feels very aimless. And on a special occasion with one of her friends that is about to enter a completely new part of their life, she just fumbles it, lets so many people down, and she meets someone who gives her the opportunity to be able to go to any alternate universe. It's just completely picked at random. You can only go to 53. And for her, it's an opportunity of just oh, I could do this all over again. And, the worlds can range from something that's completely fantastical and, whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, whatever, or they could just be completely mundane and almost just purely identical to where you came from. But an important component is that once you leave, you can't come back. So there's it's if you're lucky and you kind of get homesick, the best that you can hope for is ending up in a place that is just, close enough to where you started.
Right. So, there's this cat. I just want to there's this cat, right? And
yes.
The correct pronunciation is Capra?
Yes, it is Capra, yeah.
Capra? Okay. And, Capra is he looks like a businessman, or a business cat?
Yes, he's a little businessman.
Right. But, of course, there are other, awesome cats in history and comic book histories, like Garfield or Heathcliff or
truly iconic truly iconic comic cats like Garfield.
If you would judge on based on their intelligence, which would be which? How would you rank them?
Capra is funny because there's literally layers to him that I hope people enjoy kind of figuring out, and yeah, that's tough. Because obviously, going back to Garfield or Heathcliff, there's no point of comparison in terms of the two of them in terms of intelligence. But even something like Lying Cat or something like that, I think, I think the difference between the two of them is that it's those are actual animals that are just kind of having human traits, and then Capra is something else that I would probably just best describe as just presenting as human.
Right. Of course, when we had our interview, I asked him how you and the artist Luana met. So, how did you really find her?
Oh no, it's I feel so bad because I feel like when I talk about this, so basically what happened was that in 2019 I did one of the original drafts of it, which I hate when I revisited it. It's so bad. It's so incredibly bad. And I was searching for an artist.
First draft to the final one.
Oh, and they're completely different. And I think I've said before that it started off as a time loop book. And then I quickly realized that writing time loops is a nightmare. Time travel in general is a nightmare to write. And I didn't think it served the medium because it's I don't think it's fun for the illustrator to have to just draw the same thing over and over that a time loop concept would do. And I emailed I was looking for artists, and I was going on Tumblr, Twitter, Instagram, and I sent out around 60 emails, and I got 6 replies. And there were some that I was oh, I'm going to reach out to this dude. They're an up-and-comer. They're aspiring, and it would be really cool because, like I said, there's that that unknown quantity element to it. And then there were some real heavy hitters that I was just I'm going to go for broke and try and see if I can get this guy, and just crickets, just no answer whatsoever. Right. And then as I kept tinkering with the book, and I was fortunate enough to be able to talk to a lot of people, like I said, here in Portland, who have been working for Image, and kind of picking their brain and asking them oh, how's the best avenue to go about this, or kind of what artistic aesthetic should it lean towards. And I knew I wanted a woman to draw this book, especially because I think it's kind of hard to put into words, but I think there's kind of a tangible element that would be lost if a guy drew it. And I was kind of inspired by that thing. I remember when, funny enough, when Mad Max Fury Road came out, that George Miller, the director, his wife was the editor on it, and he said something very similar of, if a guy edited it, it just wouldn't be as good. And so, I was talking to the Image folks, and they suggested at one point Caspar Wingard, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, who does Homesick Pilots, which I think is a fantastic book, and Homesick Pilots had just started, and I quickly realized there was no way in hell that I could get Caspar in any way. And so I just decided to see oh, who does Caspar follow on Instagram? And then I found Luana, and she was doing her book Lovesick at the time, and there was this it's dark, and it's hypersexual, and there was this fearlessness quality to it that I was oh, this person, obviously since you've read issue 1, that there was another podcast that was very positive to the books, and they said the phrase "boobies out the wazoo." And I was oh, this is a person that's going to be comfortable with it, and I want to ground it in a way that all of the depictions of like sexuality, I want it to be grounded in a way that isn't just like cheap. That's not just like, oh, it's there for the sake of it. And I thought like with what Luana did on Lovesick, she would be a perfect match. And I just wrote her an email, just a cold email, and was like, hey, I think you're really great. I want to pitch to Image. Would you be interested? And she wrote me back like within a couple hours, and she was working on a project that was gonna wrap up. I think I emailed her in October, and she said she would be mostly available in December, but she was able to kind of like jump into it and start like character designing and everything like that. But yeah, she was just like completely game, really into the script. Just, it's weird because I feel like it's one of those things that doesn't just like happen easily. It sounds so unremarkable of just like, I found her on Instagram and then I emailed her and then she said yes. But it really was that easy.
Okay, I do understand on why, on your decision in choosing a female artist. I do understand when you said like, oh, it's better where there's a female touch to it rather than
100%.
having a male editor or to a female editor, because what you said earlier about when guy artists would draw, it's pretty like sexual, but
it's very
a female artist would draw, I guess it's pretty more, it makes more sense, and like they would draw what's necessary or has more taste, I guess.
Oh yeah, and then there's like there's that incredibly graphic 2-page spread that I feel like in a different artist's hands would have been so, like, for lack of a better term, like kind of gross. That I think Luana kind of captures this like perfect balance between this like raw emotional, like, they're Devin and this guy are screwing, and it's not supposed to make you feel good in any way. It's like it's cross-cut between her like banging this dude and her neglecting her best friend. That at no point do I expect anyone reading it to be like, oh man, this is so hot. Like it's not.
If I would describe the genre of your comic, I would say it's like a slice of life and sci-fi.
Yeah, I'd say yeah.
Is there a correct one?
No, I would definitely say it's very slice of life, and then leaning into that. I'm happy that a lot of the positive reviews that I've gotten out of it have said that the kind of pivot in the last 10 pages of the book catches them off guard, and it's deliberate, that I wanted them to feel like, oh yeah, like this is so sad what she's going through, and it's relatable, and then it's like, oh okay, we're doing this, because I love this thing with a lot of writers. I always say, like, if you not the sign of a good story, but the sign of like an interesting one is like if you were reading a comic and you looked at like the first like 5 pages, and then you looked at the back like 10, and it is like so different than like tonally, story-wise, like just anything you could have imagined. And I hope that it kind of piques the interest of the reader to go like, how the fuck did we get here?
Wait, does Luana do the coloring here, or?
Yeah, she is an absolute wonderkin in that she not only illustrates it, she does the coloring. We're in the process right now of doing the finale issue, and I feel so bad because I want it to be very ambitious, and I'm having her try a lot of like new stylistic things that we kind of lightly experiment with in a couple of the subsequent issues after issue 1. But she's just like killing it. And I don't want to say what some of them are, but like the coloring she's doing is just like fantastic.
How do you write your scripts? Like do you write it like Alan Moore does? Like fucking Garth Ennis, like, oh, there's like 2 paragraphs. It's full. You're just talking about one panel. It's like, oh, you're just gonna give her like 2 sentences for a panel.
It kind of is. It's kind of the latter. It is kind of the 2-sentence thing, because I have a great respect for those writers that can write basically like a novella. But I can't help but imagine that for the illustrator, if there's like that over control thing, it's kind of doing a disservice to like the illustrator's job of just being like, okay, like I never wanted to feel like, okay, you figure it out now, like I'm just gonna give you like this bare minimum and then like good luck. But you know,
small thumbnails.
no, well I give her a lot of reference material. Like, before we even start the issue, we talk extensively about, like, the visual language, and we have, like, a bunch of Google Drives where we just, like, throw in, like, so many different things as just reference. I think the heaviest I've ever done, like, dense reference material within the script itself is probably the finale. Because every now, like, Luana she'll do the layouts, and her layouts are incredible. They're borderline nearly like the finished product. And she'll send them to me for approval. And if there's like little things that I think there should just be an adjustment on, or like a different way of like kind of visualizing like the framing of a thing, we'll discuss it, just so we can kind of have that like the strongest impact and the strongest communication. But I just trust her and her particular vision because, you know, I mean, you've seen the book. She's just like utterly incredible.
I have a question.
Yeah.
We've talked about this in chats and in the interview that this story sets in LA, right?
Yes.
I just noticed some pages that, hey, why is it snowing?
Well, from the get-go, I wanted to start, like, I thought it would be a disservice if we didn't already start in an alternate world, and I'm not subtle about it. Like, I'm glad that there's this kind of, like, just, like, casual normality to it, because you're the first person, I haven't seen a review yet that points out, like, hey, this is kind of weird that it starts out this way, because it's between, like, that and then, you know, the La La Land little bit that's in there with the completely different cast. Which is actually, the funny thing about that is that's actually the original casting for the movie, before it settled on Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone. And so I just kind of wanted to pay lip service to that, but I just thought, like, I was kind of inspired by Into the Spider-Verse and how, you know, it's comfortable just kind of being like, we're going to start an alternate universe from the get-go, but it's going to be grounded in the emotions. Yeah. Right. But yeah, no, and also it's just like, I love snow, I love Christmas as an aesthetic, because I think it's like really, it's part of my DNA that I think comes from me loving the work of Shane Black, right. And how he sets, you know, like Lethal Weapon, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, all of his films around Christmas, because there's this kind of like amplified sadness to it, as, you know, during, you know, we just passed the holidays, and that kind of thing about just like, oh yeah, you know, it's like when you get out of a relationship and then Christmas rolls around, and you're like, well, I don't have anyone to spend it with. I don't have anything to do.
If you're very heavily influenced by Shane Black, does it mean that someone in your series is gonna die?
I don't want to spoil it. I will say that there is a lot of loss in the subsequent issues, but I don't want to say whether or not someone dies. I know that's like such a cop-out, because I'm basically saying like, yeah, someone dies, but like not the way you think. But like I really don't want to give it away.
On the pages where it shows that it's snowing, I just noticed that there's a billboard and there's like a Spotify link or something. A Spotify link. And I was thinking,
yes.
What kind of playlist are we talking about here?
Did you scan it?
Oh, not yet. I'm gonna scan it later, but yeah. You
were also the first person to point that out, and I kind of didn't think I'd be able to get away with that. I thought when I passed it on, Image has a very loose editorial, which is mainly just kind of like, you know, little tiny tweaks, a lot of spelling and grammar kind of stuff. But there's no one that is ever like, you have to completely change this layout, or like you have to change these colors. And that is a Spotify account that if you scan it, it will actually take you to Devin's Spotify account.
Right. So,
and there are multiple playlists in her Spotify account.
Okay, so that's a bonus for every viewer or for any reader, I guess. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no, I wanted to do that from the get. I'm very inspired by like a lot of those kind of creators that can make as large a world as possible out of their work. And at the like early on, I was so like, we're gonna make a Spotify account and we're gonna make like an Instagram account for Devin, and it'll all be in universe. And then as production continues and you're doing all these things, you're like, Spotify.
And I think there's an Image title that, and they would release vinyls, right?
Yeah. Is it called vinyl?
No, I forgot. It's like a long title. it's a long comic book title.
Yeah, and it just dropped too, if I'm not mistaken. It dropped not that long ago.
It's in there. I think they're in issue 3 or issue 2 or something. But yeah,
that's
kind of a merchandise or that kind of marketing push.
I mean, I think it helps. I think it's a barometer of how dedicated fans are, and also kind of like what the staying power of a book can be. Saga, not just like the action figures, but you've got like the many plushes. Something like Scott Pilgrim, which has like toys, board games, video game, etc., etc. And not every book is also going to amount to that same level. But I think if you have like a really dedicated fan base, Luana and I over the holiday I had this idea of like doing like a Bolero kind of like Christmas card, and I told Image like, we're doing this. It would be really cool if we could get this in stores, and we missed the deadline by just like a day. And it bummed me out so much, because even though it wouldn't have been something that was for sale, it would have just been something that anyone could just grab on the way out of a comic store. I thought that little tangible thing would have been so cool. And Luana and I, we've talked about, I think we talked about possibly doing like Capra keychains, like the ones that are in the book. But I think hopefully, I don't think any writer kind of creates a book and they have like what's that Mel Brooks joke, that like merchandise kind of a mindset to just be like, we're gonna make all the it's that to me is very like Marvel when they did Secret Wars. Where the only reason that book existed was because I think it was like Kenner Toys or something like that was like, we gotta make a bunch of toys, so just like do whatever and like give everyone like new costumes and all that stuff.
Matt Fraction and a British comic book writer, I forgot his name, but I think he wrote this vinyl fucking
Phonogram by Kieran Gillen, I think it was.
Phonogram writer. They're well known to put like soundtracks in comic books.
Yes.
Right? Would you like to do that kind of style on your writing?
I think it's
since your background is like more in music, right?
Yeah. I mean, I did. I love music, and it's something it's something that's been it's so weird to say this. Like, music has been a big part of my life, and it's like, well, who isn't that person? Because it's like everyone listens to music unless you're kind of like a sociopath. But I think it's tricky to kind of give a soundtrack to a book, especially like if it's, because I've noticed there are writers that when you go to the supplements of an issue, they'll have like this was the soundtrack for this issue. And I think it's a great opportunity to kind of like, put like just recommendations generally, but I think it's tricky if you're doing a book and maybe you have like you should listen to this song for this page, because there's no way to control how readers will like, skim through a book, because it's like, if you put a song that's like 3 minutes and they're reading like a single issue, you could like, just like knock that out in the 3 minutes of the song.
Right. Now, you and Luana shared your soundtracks.
Yes.
Based on your comic, right? But
yes.
Has there been a moment where you and Luana disagreed on the soundtracks that you've shared? It's like, hey, what do you think of this music? And it's just like,
no, it's. We haven't. I'm lucky in that I'm very spoiled by our working relationship, because I could probably count on one hand how many disagreements on like anything in general we've ever had, and they were all incredibly cordial and incredibly just they were very minute things, but we've actually never really talked in depth about music. Not out of like disinterest, but I just don't think it's ever come up as a conversation. I know her music taste is very good, and she, I think it's very indicative of her books, where there's this kind of like poppy, kind of like darker synthwave kind of sound to things, and every now and again in a conversation, like when we were very early in development on the book, she would be like, "Oh, this scene kind of reminds me of like this song or something like that," and I'd check it out and I'd be like, "Oh yeah, I could definitely see that." But yeah, no, we've never really disagreed on that kind of stuff. It sounds so disinteresting of just like, oh, we've never had any like hurdles to overcome.
And you said before that you guys never met, you and Luana never met, and however, you and Brandon Graham, your colorist, are like neighbors.
So Brandon and we met about, I think it was 5 years ago. We met at a party of a mutual friend, and I don't know what it was. I was like 20, I think I was 22 at the time, and we just hit it off talking about comics. And what's funny too is that the friend that invited me was the mutual friend that invited me was like, "Hey, I'm having a party. Brandon Graham is here," and I had no fucking idea who he was. like I was like, okay.
Brandon Graham.
That's like being like, "Hey, my friend, like John whatever is here." I'm like, okay, sure. And she was even just like, I was like, "I don't know who that is," and she's like, "Oh, famous comics guy," and I was like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." And then I met him, and he was super cool, and he is super passionate about comics, and it is his lifeblood. And I actually, he's
comics at that time, or you weren't?
No, I didn't start reading his comics until, oh gosh, what was it? I think it was like a couple of years into our friendship. He gave me his art book that he published through Image that you can still get, and I was, his style is incredible as an illustrator and as a colorist. And then I read his book Multiple Warheads, like the first volume of it, and I was like, this is amazing. And then years, when I moved to Portland, which he helped me do, he gave me, his basically his entire catalog of work from like King City, Multiple Warheads, Prophet, and I had actually put off reading it for a while.
You didn't even think of, oh, I'm going to support my friend, so that's why I'm going to buy his comics.
Oh no, I mean, like, I any chance I could get, I would buy it. But he's a very selfless guy, and he has just like tons of comps, and he was just like, here, just take these. And for a while, even after he gave them to me, because he is by all accounts my, he's not just my best friend, but in no uncertain terms, he's my mentor. Because he's been in the industry for decades at this point, and he's learned so much, and his craftsmanship on his work is impeccable, and I genuinely think, he's one of the greatest current working cartoonists and comic creators right now. And as he would kind of he's a creative consultant on all my works. And even when we're lettering, I'll kind of ask him what do you think about this? And very spontaneously sometimes we'll throw something in there that was just not completely planned. Oftentimes it's something that makes us laugh. I think it's in the review copy that there's a part where Devin is at the bar, and in the background there's a guy standing there, and it just has a word balloon next to him that just says "cuck." And there was no reason that was not in the script. There was nothing that provoked it. We just thought it was funny, and we just threw it in there. But when we did the initial pitch for Image, because once again he's a great guy, he offered to letter it, and his lettering style is so distinct, and he hand letters his own work, and he hand lettered the pitch pages, and he would go on to develop a font so that way he could digitally do it. That if you ever look at any of his work that he hand letters compared to the font that's in Bolero, it's one for one. You would never be able to tell that it is not hand lettered.
That is amazing. Jeez. Okay, so why did you ask Brandon Graham to draw this rather than?
I don't. I think it just never.
Was it because of his, his feet?
No, I think it was. It just never really crossed my mind. I think it was. I mean, he always. It's kind of the same thing with why I didn't ask Caspar from Homesick Pilots. Is that when it's a creator that is acclaimed and working on their own stuff, and Brandon was working on his book Rain Like Hammers that came out last year. I just didn't. It just never crossed my mind because I was he's working on his own projects, and he very much pushed me to be, he was the one that told me, an unknown quantity of finding, a brand new illustrator is exciting. And, it just made sense to me. And funny enough, when Luana and I did a short story for Heavy Metal, I actually initially asked Brandon to illustrate that short story. And we never really had time. It just never really, worked out scheduling-wise. And then when I asked Luana to do it, she was totally game. But in that Heavy Metal issue, Brandon also did a short story, and I believe we're right next to each other. So it's kind of funny that I asked him to do the story. He couldn't do it, and we still ended up in the same Heavy Metal issue.
Say, I'm doing something for Heavy Metal.
It's very weird and very cosmic, and I'm very lucky that he's someone who I can say in some kind of, whether it's kind of tenuous manner or not, he's helping me color hopefully the next book that I do, and he's very hands-on as a creative consultant as well, because this one is hopefully going to be an ongoing series that I do next. And he did Prophet for many years, and so the idea of doing an ongoing just daunting and frightening. That I would ask him, and I still ask him multiple times, how do I do this? And he's I don't know.
Right. I used to do comics. I used to draw.
Yes.
And my own comics, not fucking Marvel comics. How do you? Of course, when you're a writer and you try to find a collaborator who is an artist. And
yes.
When you find the correct style, with the second decision making for yourself, does budget come into mind for you as a writer when you're when you're trying to find an artist, or how did you, if you're going to pitch it to Image, how do you persuade to get an artist
another thing that Brandon kind of taught me is that I think there's a lot of illustrators, especially up-and-comers, and it's completely understandable for up-and-comers to want everyone should get paid for the work that they do. And I even told Luana, and money never really was a discussion even at the forefront. She really just believed in the material. But if it was the off chance that, Image said no to the book, I was still absolutely going to pay her for, the work that she did. It was just kind of lucky that, we were brought on board. And, my other illustrators that I'm working with right now are very much the same way, where it's kind of like, I think you meet young illustrators who are very hungry for it, and it's not out of desperation, but it's out of, just like, everybody needs compensation, everybody's got to eat, but you're lucky enough if you find a collaborator who, that's not really at the forefront of what they're thinking. They're not just like, oh, we can get paid to do this. It's kind of like a love of the game kind of thing.
Yeah, so not like money, not the artist who thinks about money right away.
Yeah, no. I've been generally told by some people that if an illustrator, if you approach them and the first thing that they talk about is money, especially extensively, there's a relatively good chance that they might either not be entirely consistent or reliable, because, and the other thing too is that I think it's a clear difference between pitching to someone who's like, oh yeah, I can get paid for this, and, it's just like a job. And the illustrators that I work with, I don't want it to just be like, oh, it's a living. I want them, they co-own it. Like, Luana co-owns Bolero with me. She is a creator, she's co-creator on it, and she owns it as much as I own it. And I never wanted it to just feel like, oh, I'm just doing this book,
Right. That's awesome. Okay, so you said that you plan to, of course, an artist can only draw a month, like a comic book for
yes.
a month, right? And it can't draw multiple books, but for writers, they can.
Yes.
Write multiple books. Do you plan to write more and collaborate more artists?
Honestly, I'm naively young in my career right now, and I have a very large amount of trepidation about the idea of taking on multiple books at once, and I commend and envy writers that are like someone like Donnie Cates, who I met last month, actually, and he's a great guy. And, that man is, like, insane in terms of, like, he's doing Hulk, Thor, Venom, crossover, like, so many books at once, and the quality on them is impeccable. And I don't think I work that way, because I always fear that if you stretch yourself too thin, it's going to impact the quality of the book. And I think that there's no greater sin for an ongoing, and not even saying like, oh, a bunch of creators do this, it's just a personal thing, is that if you just kind of like treat it like, oh, I'm just going to crank out an issue and just get it done, because I would hope that every issue is something that a creator is like really slaving over and trying to make special and individual, instead of just kind of like, there's like a difference between being like, oh, this one overarching story is really good, and you can kind of bullet point the moments in it, versus being like, oh, this individual issue is really, really strong,
Right.
So I don't know. I don't think I would. I am working on different things that just kind of like, catch me in the moment. But right now, I would definitely say my biggest focus is just trying to do this ongoing, because it's wildly intricate, and if it hopefully gets picked up, it's going to take up many years of my life.
Wow. Well, do you plan to get this adapted into into other media?
Bolero?
Yeah. Do you?
It's funny. It's funny. I don't want to seem. It's very. Right now, I think we live in a time with comics, especially with indie comics, that I think readers know this too. It's very transparent when you can tell the creator is making a book to get a movie or to get a TV show.
Yeah.
And that is something that's never entered my mind, and I think it can be, it can be very harmful, because it just becomes like a throwaway elevator pitch of just like, oh, it's just blank meets blank. And with Bolero, funny enough, it never really occurred to me to like be like, oh, it should be a movie or it should be like a TV series or something like that. But when the book was announced, I was at brunch with friends, and I was not told when the book was going to be announced by Image. And the only way I found out is that the brunch place that we were at, I was at with my friends, it had a really, really bad reception. And in that little window when I was able to get like a message through, I got an email, and it was from it was from a company that was like, what about those Bolero rights? And I was like, how do these people know about this? And then I walk out of the restaurant and I get a flood of texts from friends who were like, they announced the book! And I'm like, I didn't know. So it's funny that like immediately, there's a lot of companies that are like, ooh, we want to like scoop this up because maybe it's the next big thing. But I don't know, I would want to be careful with that because I think there's a lot of, there's best case scenarios that you get like a really strong adaptation that exists on its own, but there are other lesser adaptations that I think the worst thing it can do is not support the source material in a way that makes it accessible with the medium of television and film, but also make it so that if it doesn't reach an audience, then that audience is not going to want to read the book either.
Writers would tend to write on what they know.
And
they have a lot of insights more. I'm not saying like you've crossed, but with the love story between Natasha and Devin, do you base it on your own? Do you base it on someone you know?
It's
like classic love story cliches.
It's an amalgamation of a lot of things. You can't. I don't think. I think there is an importance to the kind of write what you know, but I also think it's important to kind of like expand your horizons and challenge yourself and go like, oh, I don't know how to write this thing, so I'm just gonna like give it a shot. But I think with this, it is based on real emotions, and there are some real experiences in there that I have gone through that I think if it wasn't there, it would. I think audiences can tell when an emotional beat kind of rings hollow. There was it's funny, there was a YouTube video that I saw last year that was this comics commentator who was talking about, like, here's why romantic relationships in comics are poorly written. And it was this very strange thing where they were like, oh, these writers obviously have never been in a romantic relationship. And I was like, I don't think that's true in any way, that like we're all just kind of like, I don't think anyone's just writing like a fantasy scenario of just like, this is what this relationship would be like. But I think there's a lot that's pulled from me to make it authentic. And there's definitely points of just like absolute, just like I'm making it up because it feels right for these characters. And there's also there's a little bit of you hear things from friends, or you hear things from just like offhand from like tangential relationships of other people, and maybe you hear something and you're like, oh, that's good, and you just kind of like selfishly like, I'm gonna save that for later, and maybe I'll just like put it in here, like. And sometimes not at all. Like, there's that line in the first issue when Devin sees Nat at the party, and, there's that line of, I love you, I could see that. That is actually from, I heard it from Trixie Mattel and Katya, the drag queens, on a Netflix YouTube video. And I thought, they said it as a joke, and I thought it was one of the meanest things I've ever heard, and how devastating it could be to someone, and I was like, I'm gonna use that.
Okay. Capgrass, Capra, I mean, why did you choose a cat? Why a cat and not like...
Well, it's funny because Capra, he's a giant cat, but he's specifically a lynx, and lynxes in a lot of cultural folklore are creatures that observe the universe, and I was like, well, that's just kind of a no-brainer. And actually, the name Capra is not something that I just like pulled out of my ass. It's an actual syndrome. It's an actual like delusion that is the belief that someone around you is an imposter and a replacement of a real person.
Right. And,
which naturally, given the body hopping.
And of course, Devin is a tattooer, right?
Yeah, tattoo artist. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have a passion for tattooing? Is that it?
I mean, I have tattoos. I'm not exactly someone who's like tatted up, but I think I got my first one when I was like 21 or something. It was like a super small one, and then that thing of just like, oh, they're addictive, and then you just get like a whole bunch. But I've always been like really close friends with the tattoo artists that I've had, and just like hearing stories, and a lot of them are telling me like, oh, it's a form of therapy, or it's so personal because of the permanence to it. And I thought like, oh, a character that is doing something for other people that is permanent, and she can't accept the permanence of the things around her, especially with like people just moving on with their lives, or that a relationship can just be like permanently done,
Mm-hmm. So there is like an inside meaning of that relates to
Oh yeah, no, there's I will say that there is nothing wasted. All of the names of the characters, last names, have very particular meanings as the book will go on. And I recommend whenever a new issue comes out that if you can read the prior issues like back to back to back. There's a lot of stuff that is reincorporated or takes on a new context.
Okay, cool. And it seems like Devin has like, I guess she has like 16 tattoos, but
yeah,
it's like, how about you? How about Luana?
I don't think Luana has any tattoos. I could be wrong. I've never asked her that. I have.
Did you dictate what kind of designs do you want?
No, and funny enough, I gave her free reign. My direction was make them as random and trashy as you can. Like there's things that I actually like. There are tattoo like placements that I don't like on people, like naturally. Like I don't like butt tattoos. There's something about them that I'm just like I just don't vibe with that. And there's like that little I think it's like a broken heart or something on Devin's butt. And I remember seeing that and just instinctually hating it. And I almost asked her to get rid of it, and then I was like, this is the character, this is not based on like what I have to like. But what I think is funny is that Luana, for when we were developing it, I don't think she knew what I looked like. And if you go to my social media, I don't have photos of me. And Devin has a lot of floral tattoos, which so do I. And I thought it was like this. I felt like I was like, oh, this is weirdly personal, and also I am now afraid that anyone who sees Devin and then sees me in real life are going to be like, this fucking self-insert.
So you're saying she hasn't seen me yet?
No, she's seen me now, but in the beginning when we were developing the characters and designing them, she had no clue, and I don't think she knew I had tattoos. And then to see Devin, who has like all these different little things that are decently similar to mine, I was like, oh, I feel attacked right now.
Because I gotta say, you look like Devin's coworker, who's a tattoo guy.
Oh, Ambo! So funny enough, Ambo is actually based on someone. They're based on this internet personality named Steve Zaragoza, who was on the YouTube channel SourceFed many years ago, and I was a big fan of him, and still am. And I still watch his videos. He has a YouTube channel right now with his friends called The Valley Folk, which is like fantastic. And the name Ambo, like the name of the tattoo artist in the book, was actually the name of my first tattoo artist. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna kind of honor him, put him in here, and model his character after Steve, because it just feels like, just some decisions you can't really explain it, and you're just like, oh, this feels right. And I emailed Steve. We had never spoken before. He had no idea who I am, and I was just like, hi, I'm working on a comic, and I'd like to base this character off of you. And he was like, cool, and just said yes, and just was completely game for it, and I'm very grateful for him to do that.
So, Bolero's going to come out this week, right?
Yes, Wednesday the 19th.
Do you plan to go to your local comic book store and go up there and set up a table and say, hey, free signing?
I don't know how stores are dealing right now in terms of signings with the variant going on. But I definitely there's a couple stores near me that I'm definitely probably going to go in there with a silver pen.
How's the scare over there? Like up in
it's not terrible. There's definitely been some things like certain restaurants and certain businesses are just kind of like, hey, we're not really like admitting a whole lot of people in here right now, and I know that there are some places that are just like completely taking a break just because it is really impacting their business. Comic shop seems to be doing like pretty okay, and everyone has to show their vaccination card, but I definitely think that probably for a little while signings might be off the table. I've definitely known too many people, even just innocuously, who have just like gone to the movies, who have come back and been like, well, I got COVID.
Oh, wow.
But I'm probably gonna go in there with like a silver pen and just ask the owner like, hey, can I just like sign a couple of these?
Just get a stack and just get a big marker and just sign everything and just get out of there.
Oh yeah, just like a weirdo. Like they could be like, was that really the writer or not? Or they could just be like, he's just a crazy person that walks in and is like, I wrote this.
Vandal, stop with that. That's fucking funny. That's funny. So when do you and Luana plan to meet up or
it would be cool if, whenever major conventions really open up. I was actually not as a vendor because, I don't have anything out like physically yet, but just as a kind of like spectator, and I was there with friends. I went to Emerald City Comic Con last year in Seattle, and that was pretty cool. But I think if things really open up and travel is really cool and things seem to be a lot more chill, I would love it if Luana could come to the States, or alternatively if there's like bigger conventions in Europe. It would be so cool to go there. I feel like I would probably need a friend who can speak Italian to kind of act as like my translator. But hopefully
Spanish a little bit of Spanish.
Just a little bit, yeah.
But yeah. Okay, cool. So, congratulations, Mr. Wyatt Kennedy. And,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, like what a character says in your book, great tits.
And as she would say, suck my clit.